Namaskar. Welcome to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. This edition of the India Foundation podcast features the conversation between Mr. Come Carpentier, consultant at the India Foundation, and Professor Andrey Volodin, senior research fellow at the Institute for World Economy, Russian Academy of Sciences, and head of Center for Oriental Studies at the Diplomatic Academy, Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Russian Federation. This conversation is on the theme Prospects of Indo-Russian Cooperation. Let's begin.
Good afternoon, Privyat. Professor Volodin, it is my pleasure to see you again after a long time, even if at a long distance, because the last few months have not really been conducive to travel for any of us.
Yeah.
So we have to rely on electronic means, but it's a pleasure to, in this very critical and very fast-moving time that we live in, it's a very opportune moment to ask you and let you distill your wisdom on some issues that are facing India, Russia, and the world at large. You are one of the great specialists of India in Russia, but also a great friend of India. And we have been friends for many years. After we were introduced by the late and regretted J.C. Kapoor. And I would like to begin by asking you, in the light of the recent meeting between the Chinese and Indian ministers under the umbrella of the Moscow of the Russian, the government of the Russian Federation, whether you feel this meeting, which took place in difficult circumstances, still shows that there is potential for Primakov's vision of the Russia, India, China trilateral.
Thank you very much, dear Com, for your question. I'm pleased and honored to be interviewed with such an eminent personality as you are. And I will start by saying that this, in fact, trilateral meeting, India, China, Russia, did, some traction in our trilateral relationships. We understand in Moscow that there is a very complex relationship between India and China, dating back to the 1962 frontier war, and the history memory of India, both of elites and the broad masses, keeps these 1962 wars intact. And from my point of view, to reverse these parts of his history memory is a very important step in pushing this relationship forward. We mustn't forget that a new factor came into the play, came into the action, and that is the pandemic of COVID-19. So this pandemic of COVID-19 made us more closed and oriented towards more regionalization than globalization, towards Eurasia. And naturally, Primakov's idea of India, Russia, China triangular is gaining traction, is passing through a, so to say, second birth. I think that there are some positive signals from the Chinese. They understand that their economic growth that was transformed subsequently into a kind of aggressive political and economic policies somehow made not only the neighbors but also the peoples of Asia to be on alert. So there is, from my point of view, a serious rethinking in China, in Beijing, of their relationships with the outer world, India in particular. And on the other hand, the Chinese, after the standoff in the Himalayas, are apprehensive of this quadrilateral security dialogue. In Russia, it is called Quad. And the Chinese treated this Quad as the Asian equivalent of NATO. And they understood, I mean, the Chinese scholars and Chinese officials, that this standoff pushed India further to the Quad and to the United States, to Australia, and to Japan. And so from my point of view, we cannot speak only of Russia, India, and China, but we are to mention the attitudes of the other Asian nations. And these other Asian countries do not want to pick sides between America and China. They want to make the equation of forces in Eurasia as more complex as possible. China and America should be complemented by Russia, by India, by Japan, by Australia, and by any other countries to be on the safe side, as Indians prefer to explain this situation. So the Asian countries understand that this Cold War, or maybe a multilateral conflict coming of the China-America trade war, may be disastrous for the whole continent, for the whole Eurasia, economically, politically, and culturally. That is why I think that Primakov's ideas are very relevant in this very complex context.
Thank you. I was, of course, reminded while you spoke of the recent book by the Foreign Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar, in which he, of course, it's called the India Way, and he talks about the wish in India to have not only a multipolar world, but a multipolar Asia, because the perception has grown here. It's always been there, but it has grown substantially in the last few months, that China sees itself as the leader of Asia, being in a way the only other superpower nowadays. And unfortunately, that perception has damaged the earlier spirit of concord, or at least dialogue, which was nurtured at Wuhan and Mahabalipuram in successive meetings between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, it seems to us, and to many analysts, that one country which can indeed help in recreating a spirit of mutual understanding and moderation is Russia, because of its privileged relations with both India and China. And I believe in that sense that the next US elections will have a rather large impact, because either we will see a continuation of the US very revanchist, if you want to call it that way, or very, insecure, essentially, policy towards the great powers, other great powers, or we will see maybe a greater flexibility and a more essentially conciliatory attitude from Washington, D.C. But we can still expect, especially if the Democrats come to power, we can still expect to see a very defensive attitude, and especially a very the usual American professed concern for human rights in other countries, which will not facilitate relations with either China or Russia, as we know. Now, in your view, what might be the current evolution in Russia's foreign policy? Because there is some perception, at least here, and also in Europe, that Russia is also going to undergo certain changes in terms of its approach to the world and to its domestic policies. Would you have any insights to give us on this?
Oh, thank you, Com, for the question. The question is really thought-provoking. And at the very beginning, I would say that Russia is too inertial an entity to change its policies very fast. But this reassessment of Russian foreign policy is going on, and the events of 2014, the reconnection of Crimea and the crisis in the east of Ukraine somehow pushed Russia into a more realistic view of the foreign policy, of a new foreign policy paradigm. We understand that under objective circumstances, Europe is beginning marginalized. And the role of the Asia Pacific, including the USA at its very eastern extreme, is growing year by year. And that is why Russia is trying to balance its European policies and policies in the Orient. So the policy in Europe is becoming more and more differentiated. Russian public opinion and probably the elites also are disappointed to a certain extent with the relations with Germany. That is why more interest in Russian-French, not entente, but dialogue. And so we also find some other countries in Europe that are not anti-Russian and that have no hidden agenda in their foreign policy behavior. So far as the Oriental direction is concerned, we continue to uphold good relationship with China because we are neighbors. India was our exceptional ally during the period of the Soviet Union. Then it was a kind of mutual estrangement, not loud but implicit. And we are trying to go Indian, to go Southeast Asian, and to go South Asian. But we must understand that to be more active in foreign policy realm, we have to diversify our economy. And this crisis, the embargo, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the oil prices war with Saudi Arabia and tacitly with America demonstrated convincingly that we should form a new economic policy paradigm. That is why I am more interested not in what is going on at the very top of the political elite. Changes are quite dynamic. But I am more interested that in the area of institutions and attitudes. People are becoming more and more critical to the institutions and to the personalities. It is an open secret that there was a movement, and it still persists in this or that form in Khabarovsk. It was a kind of Gandhian movement to reassess the center-state relations. That is how I see this peaceful movement. And this peaceful movement was encouraged and was supported by the whole country. So Khabarovsk is also the very east of Russia, and by paying more interest to our far eastern regions, we involuntarily sometimes is moving to the east. Of course, we understand what is meant by the Asian conundrum, that interrelationships are very complex, not only between China and India, but Japan, China, China, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. But you mentioned this Primakov idea. I would say, that probably the foundations were laid even earlier, during the Soviet period, when there was a meeting between the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, Mrs. Gandhi, and the Soviet Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin. Alexei Kosygin suggested that India would be our so to say, Soviet pusher with the system of collective security. Indira Gandhi gently abstained, saying that China should be involved, though the controversies were very acute between India and China. And now we have a re-edition of this situation. The collective security system in Asia, coming from the Eastern Mediterranean to India and Southeast Asia in the south, and China, Japan, Korea in the east. That is oh yes, that is only my temporary vision, because the situation is very dynamic.
Yes, well, indeed. You see, we have heard about collective security also from the president of Iran, and that's very much been raised in the context of what's happening in the Middle East. And there, definitely, Russia, China, but also India would have a key role to play, given that the United States and its allies are slowly pulling out of the region in a way, although we don't know yet how far this pull-out will go. But it seems to be an economic, and also not only an economic necessity, but also an increasing strategic consideration that perhaps it's no longer viable for the United States in particular, and the West in general, to deploy so many resources in that region, which is anyway very volatile. But that brings to your own work, which I'm very familiar with, since we have been privileged to publish some of your articles, on what are the options, what are the opportunities for a greater Indo-Russian economic cooperation. And you have pointed out repeatedly that it should not remain based solely on military cooperation. There should be growing investments. You have talked about crisscrossing investments.
Crisscrossing investment.
Not only at the level of the two governments, because we know that the system that was in place when the Soviet Union was in existence is no longer really functioning. And therefore, you have mentioned the opportunities that exist between specific Indian states and Russian oblast or regions. You have even mentioned a few specific examples in oblasts like Tyumen and Chelyabinsk, and of course, the Far East, in particular with what's happening now, the development of the Far Eastern region around Sakhalin and around Vladivostok. And there seems to be some movement there, probably not fast and large enough, but there seems to be an increasing interest from major Indian corporations. But I wish also the agricultural cooperation could be developed, because we all know that Russia has a lot of land and perhaps not enough agriculturists, and India, on the other hand, has a lot of agriculturists without having enough land. So I can see a natural match there. Do you see any practical move being made, at least on the Russian side, that could encourage Indian response to an Indian response to take place in this regard?
Well, my feeling is that Russia has a number of kind of pilot projects. You mentioned Chelyabinsk. Chelyabinsk is a very controversial region, so to say. On the one hand, it is a region where tanks and other military equipment is produced, and on the other hand, Chelyabinsk is a great agricultural area. It is the Black Earth. It is the Black Earth region. It is the Chernozem. Yes, it is the southern Urals, and we have a project sponsored by the Ministry for Agriculture of the Russian Federation, also supported by the Chelyabinsk Regional Administration, and we passed it over to the Indian Embassy, but unfortunately 4 years back, and we have no feedback communication. I've reminded it several times to our Indian friends and colleagues. So if there are some pilot projects start in Russia-India relationship, it will be a good beginning. Point two, we have not enough information of the Indian investment potential, of the Indian existing and perspective industrial sites where Russians non-government actors could invest. Only Mr. Lysin has some interest, and he knows India. But our businessmen, putting it frankly, they are the bourgeoisie of the first generation. So they are to be enlightened, and unfortunately, without some common bank of information, this could be done. It will be difficult to promote this cooperation, and that is why I greet the the decision of Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin to be more active, the state institutions, to promote some private investments, respectively in Russia and in India. The potential is great, and the person you know, Andrey Kortunov, said once that India's is a great integration project. So Russia should be a great integration project, because after the dismemberment of the Soviet Union, we understand that there are disparities in the regional development, like in India. Russia is like India. So with the help of our bilateral cooperation, bilateral collaborative ties, we can do a lot in doing this day-to-day business, but then probably some good fallout will be seen.
Well, indeed, because there is, as always, a strong interest on this side as well, especially since we know what kind of difficulties the world is experiencing now at the level of trade and even at the level of industrial production because of the crisis of consumption and related problems. But what I think is very interesting, and you are well placed to comment on it, is that increasingly there is I would say, not only a doubt, but there is a desire to reconsider the very structure of the global economy, which was so far based on the liberal model. And we all know this liberal model has shown its limits and its flaws in the context of the economic COVID crisis, since the two are interrelated.
Right.
The supply chains are proven to be dangerous for economic and political stability, unreliable, and the need for self-sufficiency and for a different model of autonomous sovereign development has become very present in policymakers' minds. In India, we have the Atmanirbhar Bharat, the policy of autonomy, self-sufficiency, and economic sovereignty. And I believe Russia is thinking in the same direction, because there is less and less of an option, in the sense that relying on foreign FDI, on foreign domestic investment and on other such traditional tools is turning out to be quite an unsatisfactory and unreliable proposal. So I hope that this would lead to the evolution of global and national structures, which would facilitate relations between countries such as India and China, which are, of course, in a different position, because they are not really part of the global capitalist system. They are still on the margin of it. And the hope was that they could enter it, but I know that this is now become quite a controversial subject. There is a lot of new thinking coming in.
Right. I 100% agree, and just to continue your logic, I would say that there are the economic foundations of India, Russia, China triangular. Because you put the question on the BRI, what is the fate of the BRI? I think that the prospects are not good, and the Chinese fully understand that this COVID and the new elements, other new elements in the global situation will push India, China, and Russia into closer cooperation in the economic field. The Eurasian Economic Union, for instance, the question that was mentioned in your questionnaire, India is interested. India is interested to take part. China is also interested, but Russia is on alert, because we are afraid that Russian industries should be might be in peril. But step by step, this idea of changing globalization, for regionalization within the Eurasian landmass, I think it is a very good idea.
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of the recent discussions I had here about India's participation in the Eurasian Economic Union is that although it could be an interesting alternative in a way to BRI, to the Belt and Road Initiative, it could cooperate with BRI, but it would make sure that BRI is truly a multilateral project and not just a Chinese expansionist project, a China-driven project. Therefore, the Eurasian Economic Union is a prospect for India, which is quite attractive because it could also bring other states, particularly Central Asian states, into it.
That's right. That's right.
And of course, one doesn't want to be overambitious and plan too large a union, which could include countries that do not necessarily have a great deal of economic complementarity with each other. So, but in its current shape, the Eurasian Economic Union, we all know what challenges there are now in Belarus, but still, it represents a manageable core of countries that in a way are can be coordinated far better than, to give not a very good example, but the European Union, which is now having real stress problems because of its excessive growth and the lack of, you might say, the lack of coordination and the lack of compatibility between many of its member countries, economically speaking.
Yes, I agree. Just a few words about Belarus. Belarus is very tightly integrated economically with Russia, and the Russian market is absolutely indispensable for Belarus. And that is why people were quite impartial towards this so-called velvet revolution in Belarus. So the economic ties within the Eurasian Economic Union were not shattered and were not touched by the events in Belarus. With India, we had very good relations during the Soviet period. India was our number one foreign economic policy partner. But it was done on the basis of the state institutions. The idea is to complement the state institutions that are very important with the privately run institutions, both in India and in Russia. Because take a very simple example. Indian fruits, mango. Mango is the symbol of India, but I don't know what is the problem with mango. But mango now is consumed from Egypt, from Senegal, even from Peru, Mexico, but not from India. India is not further than Egypt from Moscow. That is a problem because mango is a symbol of India, and when India's mangoes come to Russia, India will be reinvented. Reinvented is a great power, at least in the eyes of consumers. So these symbolic things also should be taken into consideration.
Yes, I think that the Indian export sector has made some progress in recent years, but the current crisis has obviously taken a toll. And with regard to agricultural commodities, there is a long-standing set of issues which have not necessarily been fully resolved yet. So I completely agree with you that some of those very practical matters have to be resolved, just as in matters of high technology, where both India and Russia have both very qualified personnel as well as very competent facilities. There should be a much greater push and I'm talking about civilian technologies here, because we all know that the focus so far has been mostly on military applications, but we really have to think of innumerable, you might say, private sector, but also sometimes government sector industries that are capable of developing new products and of producing for the respective markets. So all that has to be developed further, and one has to hope that certain joint commissions can be set up. Some of them already exist, but that they can be made to deliver results faster, because the focus now in India, as I'm sure it also is in Russia, is to accelerate the delivery of projects. That once project has been accepted and has been considered valid on both sides, then it should be carried out expeditiously. I would like to end perhaps this discussion with some considerations on the wider world, on what is happening. You have in some of your papers, you have written about the transformation of many societies, especially so-called Western societies. You have used Neclesa's term, Professor Neclesa's term, of orientalization of Western societies, Western Europe and the United States, North America, which is a very major phenomenon, because it means that the distinctive character of these societies is changing. It is being affected by the mass migration and the social reactions, whether it's adjustment or opposition, that it arouses. Do you believe this phenomenon is leading to the weakening, to the eclipse of the traditionally long-standing hegemonic Western societies, and is providing a boost to other societies which are not affected by the same phenomena, such as, in fact, Russia and India?
Yes, I hope so, because history has not ended. History has just returned, as Parag Khanna, the Indian analyst, mentioned in one of his books. And my idea is that culture and the civilization core of any society is of pivotal importance. In India, you have a lot of nationalities and two main racial groups, but there is an omnibus civilization like Hinduism. And you have this great integration project. So to continue with the pivot of Russian culture and common history of peoples populating the Russian Federation is one thing, and to have a Russia integration project on the other may be a national idea. So you in India have already had the national idea, and I think we are coming closer to this Russian national idea after 25 years of going about this philosophical core.
Well, I am reminded of the fact that as the world changes and India is in a way pulled towards either one of the two blocks which are essentially forming, which is what you might call the old US-centric bloc on the one hand, and the China-centric bloc on the other. But of course, many countries do not want to belong to either of the two, and they want to chart an independent course with good relations with all sides, with both blocs. And India is certainly one country which would like to continue it's independent, you might call it non-aligned or multi-aligned way. And in that sense, it has an obvious convergence with Russia's traditional policy. Mm-hmm. So it is to be hoped that India can remain, in a way, in the middle. On the one hand, having good relations with the Pacific powers and developing its economic integration with the Eastern Pacific and Southeastern Asia, and on the other, further its integration or its cooperation with Central Asia, the Middle East, and essentially what is represented by Russia and the countries that were part of the Soviet Union and that are now in part members of the Eurasian Economic Union. That is, of course, I think, the most synthetic and the most satisfactory vision of the future for both India and Russia. And eminent scholars like you play a key role in facilitating this, the adoption of this perspective by the leaderships of both countries.
Come, thank you very much. One more point. Central Asia is important for us both, for India and Russia, because we are vitally interested in the preservation of secular elite and secular institutions in this Central Asia, immune to any versions of radical Islam and radical religious ideas. That is my point.
Indeed, this is a very welcome message in India as well. Professor Volodin, it is as always a pleasure. I thank you for making yourself available in Moscow. And I also wish to thank the India Foundation and our viewers and listeners, and look forward to a future opportunity of interacting with you. Have a very good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Kon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the India Foundation podcast. Do like, share, and subscribe the India Foundation channel.